Good evening. Welcome to Chess Comedy Books 31, in which we take a light-hearted look at the serious world of chess. Just before we start, three people to thank: Paul James Kelly, Philip Ware, a very old friend, Luis Mindez Castillo, and David Clayton. David, I've actually got one of your books, which you let go, and I bought from Ken Harmon for about 20 pence, I think, or something. Anyway, to these gentlemen, thank you all very much indeedly. Now, this is called Little Books, Little Penguins. And the first of these is this. This surprised my colleague, John Upham. I told him it was a good book. It took him a while to get a hold of a copy. I think that this Queen was part of a number of sets bought by the British Chess Federation about 50 years ago for the European Team Championships in Bath. It was certainly the last time I saw them, and I'm not sure if they are still knocking around. If they are, I can only repeat, I'm not aware of it. Hugh Alexander said when he wrote this book, which is done in a form of tests, that he had ruthlessly plundered his Sunday Times column, which I used to read as a child. I've still got some cuttings from that, and they're really good. It gives little hints, so it gives you a position, and then it sort of says, well, what would you do if you moved the Queen, or don't you think his knight's on the silly square, or something like that. It also gives you the scores that the top internationals got. Penrose was a bit over thorough, Keane was a little bit rushed himself, Hartston this, blah, blah, blah. And it goes down, I think, to Jana. I think Jana did it. Yes, I was right. And also Andrew Whiteley. And he's also asked various club players, and to a fairly modest 1500 level. So chess is a sea in which a gnat can drink, an elephant can bathe, it says at the end. Well, I expect you knew that. Mr. Milders has mentioned that when I show a book, I don't leave it long enough, and it's not very easy to see it anyway. There we are. That's what the diagrams are like. If this book is still available, new, I'd be surprised, but a very great deal of them were sold, and you can still get them in charity shops, or I'm sure eBay will do the honours. Just be a little patient and be prepared to pay a few pounds, because it's good. From very good to okay. The Teach Yourself series were very much a part of English culture some years back, and I'm about to betray my lack of preparation by saying I'm not sure if they exist anymore. They might do. Elementary endgames. Well, we all need to practice that, don't we? The middle game. Chess is conventionally divided into three phases: the opening, the middle game, and the endgame. The distinction is convenient because it corresponds to a difference of scope. When Edgar Allan Poe said that in chess one calculated, he was demonstrating to chess players his complete innocence of their mental processes. Well, Gerald Abrahams, who once said that he was Bobby Fischer, but plus an enormous intellectual endowment. I'm not sure that's right, but this book, which Malcolm Payne, a fellow Liverpudlian with Gerald, once said has a very good introduction, and then it's far too advanced. Well, maybe that's true. It has some nice old games and rather odd, though not unintelligible, notation. Yes, it's got its own sort of invented form. Here's Botvinnik in battle with Fine. But I mean, you can get through that, can't you? Gerald Abrahams, M.A. Oxon, barrister at law. He was indeed, this is the impression from 1973. So obviously after the Fischer-Spassky match, he knocked on his door and said, could you revive it, please? I hope he got a few quid for it. It looks dated now, but quality will out. Now, here's something very, very special. What do you think to this? My Husband and I, and there's the Queen. Edited by Terence Tiller. Now, I'm under the impression Terence Tiller was like Hoyle. He was a games man, a bit like the late David Pritchard, except not. This is absolutely wonderful. It has sections, well, best games. It has collaborative efforts, even one featuring Bobby Fischer, which was on the radio. And that, I think, is the genesis of the book. There's games from simultaneous displays. John Littlewood playing Gligerich. Gligerich playing Arthur Hall. I mean, come on, Worthing fans. D. Mattingly versus Gligerich. I mean, come on. I know you've heard of D. Mattingly, but who's heard of Gligerich? Masters at Work. There's a section by Michael Lipton on problems. There's any amount of new discoveries. Yes, it was Elaine Tramner, I think, who said when she played Night to Night 5, she wasn't certain really if in Staunton's handbook it said you could move your pieces backwards. And said, well, what's the point of putting it there if you're just going to play pawn to rook 3 and I have to move straight back again? So I don't know what I bothered for in the first place. And we all of us know that emotion. Or if we don't, maybe you don't have emotions. If you don't have emotions, you're probably a very good player. Except not. He even gives one of his own games. Bloody cheek. My favourite game by one of my favourite players, Anne Sunnox. This will be useful for my colleague John Upham. There. She plays the Mora Gambit. Anne always liked the Mora. And I played it over the years as well. Not for that reason, but I have. There we are. It's an English descriptive notation. Now, here's another book by Gerald Abrahams, but not the same one. It's got a lovely cover, worthy of a frame. Look at that. Isn't that lovely? Again, this is a penguin. It says, Gerald Abrahams has been a chess player since childhood, and in his teens devised the line of play known as the Abrahams defense. After taking a first in philosophy at Oxford, he has been occupied as barrister, political theorist, and candidate, lecturer, and author. Can't argue with that. Though his chess is original, his teaching on the subject is orthodox. And his Teach Yourself Chess, which has been a bestseller for 10 years. Mr. Abrahams lives in Liverpool. What it doesn't say is that he had a big nose, a big ego, and he smoked very big cigars. Now, this is slightly more civilized in its formatting. Mr. Melders, is that long enough to show you? Here at the back, slightly small text, but I wouldn't shy away from it for that reason. He puts forward many middle game notions, very scientific, I think, Gerald in his thinking. Dogmatic, I would think. To state the matter another way, there are no miracles in chess, even if there is a little useful meaning to be derived from such a statement as that chess is the operation of cause and effect. Yet it is true that there are antecedents permissible to the chess mind not to be noted to the logical mind as such, suggested of the general field of consequences. Now that's pretty deep water, isn't it? I thought chess was a board game, but it seems to me that it's, well, by now the reader has either decided that chess is too great a strain on the eye of the normal mind, or has realized there are features of the game or mental aids to vision that make chess playable even by those who are not affected by hypermetropia. Hypermetropia? Reach for that dictionary and find out what that means. I don't know what that means. Anyway, some games by Trifalovic, not necessarily a player, whose games you would immediately leap to mind. And here he is, modest fellow that he is, playing against Canal. And he's talking about imagination. Quite a nice little book. You'll still see it around in junk shops, if you could see any junk shops around, second-hand shops. Quite like it. Here we have an unashamedly 1960s or even 1950s book for the old half crown, 2 and 6. This is when chess was a game, to be enjoyed on rainy afternoons or something, or with your uncle on Christmas Day. Anyway, here it is. The Game of Chess, the same title as the book by Terence, I think. Could be wrong about that. And it tells us about Harry Golombek, I've little doubt. It talks about simpler endings, openings, middle games, planning, more about the end games, more about openings, great masters of the 19th century to present, tournament chess, how to write down some positions, a bibliography, no doubt featuring mostly books by Harry Golombek. Oh, and it's a book by Harry Golombek anyway. There we are. It's a pretty cluttered page. You can thread your way through that. There's much, much worse around. But for all of that, I would have liked a slightly less jumbled jungle to go through. Jumbled jungle. An authority on the rules, he was appointed International Chess Federation to act as judge in the World Championship match in Moscow in 1954. In other words, he used to sit in a table and not do anything, apart from perhaps go to sleep, and who can blame him? It's quite a nice little book. And here's the same book with the same set as, that's the king, and I think that's the queen, isn't it? In the same set there. So this is an updated version of Harry's book. Let's see when it was published. 1977. I'm not sure what updates took place, but they might have sneaked in a reference to Bobby Fischer. Kind of useful little bibliography. It mentions that the last British champion of 1973 was W.R. Hartston. Well, W.R. Hartston, I bet you're glad to be in this book. Robert Fischer, or Bobby Fischer, as he's more commonly called, belongs to the category of boy prodigies in chess history, which has already produced such famous names as Capablanca and Reshevsky. Well, there you are. It calls him at the back, and he would have rather have liked this, even though it's wrong. Dr. Golombek. Well, Dr. Golombek. There we are. One last book to show you where anonymity appears to be the key, because it doesn't have an author. This is not, repeat, not the same book as any of the others I've shown you, but you could be forgiven for thinking perhaps that it was. This book is by Bill Hartston and is a Hodder and Stoughton, and I paid $6.99 for it. Well, I did awfully well. This is not a book for beginners, but it discusses various aspects of chess in a fairly relaxed way. For example, just choosing at random, here's roughly how it works. He talks about sacrifices. A rook needs room to stretch its wings. You thought I was going to say legs, didn't you? Mind you, if a rook is a bird, it would have wings. I thought a rook was a chariot. A weakness cannot be exploited. It's not a weakness at all. Well, I'm not sure about that. Weak squares. We already talked a good deal about weak squares. It's time we defined them. A weak square, often called a hole, is a square on your third or fourth rank which can never be defended by one of your pawns. I'll just read that again. A weak square, also often called a hole, is a square on your third or fourth rank which can never be defended by one of your pawns. Now you think of that when you're analysing. Maybe not playing, just playing over a game, as I always love to do. Backward pawns, isolated pawns. When you find a good move, savour it, suggests Bill. Pushing your pawns in endgames, advance your pawns two at a time. Pawn takes pawn is never a fair exchange. In other words, somebody misses out. The power of any piece to gain control of a square is inversely proportional to its value as a fighting piece. Well, fianchettoing bishops. Bishops are happiest on the long diagonals. Yes, they are. Now, don't go running away thinking this is a book for what used to be called the tyro. Chaos. Throwing salt. Throwing salt? Each bout of sumo wrestling begins with the contestants trying to shove each other out of the ring, with a display of glaring, squatting, stamping on the ground, and throwing copious handfuls of salt. Only W.R. Hartston would think to begin a chapter in that way. I commend this book to you, not that highly, but I do. It's a good companion, and I try to enjoy everything that Bill wrote. He wrote many books. I tried to make a list of them at one time. It wasn't easy. He's written a fair bit, but none of it recently. Thank you for listening. This has been Comedy Chess Books 31, Little Books. I'm James Pratt. Goodbye.